never seen that.
So perhaps I'll just introduce Julia in the town of Mucka. It's about 300 k's outside of Perth, and it's a wheat sheep growing community. It's becoming quite a hub actually around that region, and it's north of Merredin, for those who know Merredin is, and as the crow flies, halfway between here and Kalgoorlie. But it's, as a town, as other towns are getting quite a bit smaller around it, it still has a shop, a lot of machinery shops, and a very active community, which were very accepting of getting an artist in there. When Marco asked if they thought Mukinbudin would be interested in getting an artist, I assured him they would be, and sure enough the Shire was very accommodating. So yeah, I'll just give it over to Julia.
Oh, I'm just waiting for a few images to kind of upload apparently. Is that right? Sorry. Maybe Anne could talk first,
sure.
and then I'll follow up.
I'm the Community Development Officer at the Shire of Mukinbudin, and it was my role to be on the ground and help Julia come to town. Roderick introduced us to Ayaska because he'd gone up to Jakarta and had done a project there. So when we were asked to host it, we'd already had some background from Roderick, and we were more than happy. As Roderick said, we're always really keen to embrace new people, and we've got quite a group that likes arts in a mainly predominantly sport-orientated town. If you don't play sport, you don't usually fit in. We have an annual spring festival every year, which is art-based, so we were really keen. We had some expectations of the project initially in the initial talks, and we were reflecting on that just before I came down. And most country people are very conservative, and most of the people that make the decisions still in the country are males on the Shire Council, and so they said, great, we'll find a house and we'll find a workspace and we'll get this great lump of art that we can stick somewhere. You know, they wanted something tangible. So along came Julia, and we realised fairly quickly into it that we probably weren't going to get this tangible bit of art, but what we got was so much more. So in one way, it didn't meet the expectations of some of the councillors and other males in the area, but amazed the rest of us. And Julia had a unique ability of touching, people from children through to the elderly, and they all ended up having a connection with her through some of her conversations she had. Some of the projects she had was even the making of the sculpture of the head in the salt lake. The kids all identified with that straight away because it's fun to run out the salt lake and go up to your knees, and it was great playing with it and moulding things in their hands and stuff. And then we were all just amazed that someone would go and do that. So then we started to think, what else is she going to throw at us? And then as the projects went on and she interviewed the people from the elderly people who are pioneers, every child just about knew who they were. They were either their grandparents or their best friend's grandparents or something. And so then for them to see this project installed at Spring Festival with a gold leaf forming the horizons of their conversations, the kids just accepted it and thought it was wonderful. The other thing that she did for us was that she actually opened our minds to art. We are very conservative out there. Luckily we had Roderick already in town who had opened our minds and had, a couple of art. We had the curator of...
Jeff Kahn came up and...
for the Next Wave Festival.
Next Wave Festival? Yep.
Yeah, yep. And so we held that in our shed, and we'd already exposed some of our more staid people to different forms of art. So when we were being interviewed, my son was asked about the art, the different forms of art that Julia did, and he was asked whether he was surprised, and he just accepted that's what Julia told him, that's what art was about. And so it was really good. She's opened us up to lots of different things. Julia, do you want to have a...
Yeah, I'm ready now. I'm going to, like Kate, reflect on the process of my experience there in Mucka, which was in 2009, April, May. Everyone was waiting for the rains to come. So it was really quite fortunate in a way. It was like a pause, really. People had time to talk to me. So it wasn't so good for the farmers because they were kind of, stalling, waiting to get, rev up their machines. But for me, it was a really opportune time to be there. So I sat down, mid-2009, I sat down just before I came to Perth. I'm from Sydney. And and reflected on the time there. And so what I'm going to do is just read through kind of my stream of consciousness, if you like, just on the process of being there, my encounters, difficulties, questions that I had. Really, I came to the residency with Mucka with many, many questions. They're still ongoing, primarily about my role within the community and what is community-based art and why is there a need to label a form of art as socially engaged when it could be argued that all art requires some kind of participation or engagement, looking, listening or experiencing in some way. Isn't it all a social thing? Why do we have to label it so? What does it say about our world that we have to do this? So these are kind of questions that were sort of right here, right at the beginning. And then the next question, I guess, was how could I make connections with the town and have any kind of meaningful relationship with the people of Mucka? What right did I have to even begin to touch their histories and their lives? And so I reminded myself that my role was about my out-of-place encounters with people and the surrounding landscape. And I was wondering what it really was like living in a place like Mucka. And how could I give the residents of Mucka a voice without compromising the kind of work that I was used to making? That was a big question for me. And the Shire of Mukinbudin, I guess, felt like one big testing ground. And I was conscious of letting go of any ambitions to create a brilliant work of art, of letting go of that 19th century, late 20th century idea of the artist of genius coming in and making something and, changing the world. So, where to start? So in order to think about these questions, I set myself a project, a physical one that used the matter and the guts, the stuff of the landscape itself. The salt lakes are close to town. They're probably about 15 minutes drive out of Mukinbudin, or this particular one. Roderick Sprigg introduced me to this place and described where it was, and so it was an easy step for me to go there right at the beginning. And it had a really strong impact. Lake Brown is the place where the first white settlers reached in their first explorations of the area in the early 1900s. And the Explorer Road described it as looking like a vast white sheet. So I thought, good place to start. I felt like another white fella though, exploring the area from a really completely different perspective. Theirs was filled with survival and hope, and mine I wasn't really so sure about. I reminded myself that the unknown is a place that I wanted to be. I wouldn't be there otherwise. And most of my projects began the same way, looking for things to find me. So I collected the salt from the Lake Brown and used it to cast the form of my head as a way to think through these questions. The process was a way of letting go, of allowing the place, the weather and the landscape to form the work in a way, align myself, and maybe in some small way align myself with the farmer's dilemma of living there and letting the weather form the work. So I went back many times. These are images here of Roderick and I going out and placing the cast head on the landscape. And I can remember actually what I was talking about at the time of walking lightly, because there's a way of walking on the salt lake where you don't sink. It just depends on how you think, really. So we were developing that technique. There's an image of the head at the beginning. And Talitha and I out there, Talitha Sprigg, who was also involved in the project, out there, she was documenting things. And so I went back many times to see how she was going, and people in town heard what I was doing and heard what I was doing and some came out to look. I hadn't really expected this, as I thought about this work as a meditation on a place, really, a way of becoming more intimate with where I was. But their visits and stories about the lake and the way the level of the water rose on a full moon intensified my experiences there. These are some of the images that I took out on the lake while I was there. And as mentioned earlier, I didn't really anticipate showing any of this. For me, the inclusion of this work in this exhibition is a kind of way of sort of expressing just a way of thinking, a way of being there. And so over a period of about 9 weeks, the work slowly dissolved into the lake and eventually disappeared. And some of these images that were taken by Talitha Sprigg after I left, and this is one of them here. And Talitha's sitting just there in the second row at the front. Okay. I was quite delighted, by the way, Talitha, with the way this, the last images that you took just looked like this bird taking off. It's fantastic. So, socially engaged or community art has a multitude of forms. The common thread being somehow linked to the idea of a collective, either in its production concept or how it's viewed. But collaboration is integral. Collaboration isn't easy when you don't know the people and the place well. Collaboration can't be a contrived thing. In a way, it needs to have its own impetus and motivation. The idea of collaboration has always been an important aspect of my work and practice, and I'm usually more interested in the activity between the viewer and the object than the object itself. And as it happened, Talitha Sprigg, who I've mentioned, also a newcomer to this community at the same time, was employed to document community encounters. She and Roderick accompanied me out to the lake on several occasions, and some of her photographs, as I mentioned, are in the exhibition here at the gallery, and I like that. I like the fact that it's kind of being spread around and it's inclusive. She also documented me videoing people waving from the cars as they passed by. It must have been quite funny for the locals to see us. Me videoing motorists and Talitha standing behind photographing it all. And the idea behind this project, which is titled In Transit, was a direct response to the many encounters I had in Mucka. From the first day, strangers signalled to me from their cars, trucks and tractors. Travelling through the open landscape in town was punctuated by these brief acknowledgements, and I became fascinated by the differences and similarities between the various ways. 1 minute I could be feeling quite alone and isolated, and then get a flash of a hand or a finger as someone drove past. The moments were brief, and I began to understand how important it is for the people of Mucka to have connections with their neighbours in order to survive. Some of us have lost this need in the big cities. Some small towns are the same. I was talking to a truck driver who pulled up in front of the station one day, and the station was my studio. It was built in 1929. It's no longer used for goods or anything like that. It's a freight service. And I was lucky enough to have this space as a studio, although I was more out of the studio than in it, as I kind of really thought about this whole region as my studio while I was there. Sorry.